few special guests, some amazing, amazing guests. But before we get to that, I want to take a second to introduce someone who is very, very important in my life. And if it wasn't for this person, I definitely would not be playing jazz. It was in his class that I finally kind of thought I had a roadmap to at least move forward, to try to figure out, okay, at least if I do these things, I can probably learn to play a little bit. And he was also the director of this workshop for several years, and just a staple member of the Jazz House community, and has helped build a lot of the things that you're seeing today. And that is none other than the great Mike Lee.
Thank you so much. You're very kind. We are here today to introduce and celebrate the music of one of the great saxophonists of our time or any time. It's my distinct honor, and also our teacher, our other saxophone teacher, Bruce Williams, great honor to have called him our teacher. He's the man that inspired me, and I followed. I tried to get in every band that he was in from our mutual hometown of Cleveland, Ohio, through coming to New York and studying with him in his loft, and following him around to the Village Vanguard and to Sweet Basil and every other play he was playing, all the major rooms. It was such an inspiration to be around him. Just in anticipation of him coming today, I remembered so many things that he told me, and I've been passing along to those of you who have been in my classes. Truly one of the great musicians and spirits of our time in any music, especially as saxophonists. We all appreciate so much. Let's hear a warm welcome for the amazing Joe Lovano. So two musicians up here don't need any introduction. That's Billy Hart on the drums. Our artistic director, Christian McBride. And one of my favorite young musicians, all of our favorite young musicians on the scene is Mathis Piccard. One more time, Joe Lovano.
So much for that. Oh, we got 10?
Yeah, just for questions and answers, to be all right.
Okay. All right, before we do any of that, I want you all to recognize someone who's very important to not just this program, but all of Montclair State and all of Montclair. The building for which this is named, the Cali building, the John J. and Rose Cali building. Rose is here. Give Rose a huge round of applause. In fact, you better stand up for her, because this building might be called something else if it wasn't for her. Yeah, thank you, Rose. Thank you. In the words of Biggie, we're going back to Cali. Never mind. I completely missed that. We probably, 10 minutes, that's going to be like 2 questions. But we are so happy to have both you cats here today. Thank you very, very much. Joe, I've known you a long time. It's great to see you, man. You sound and look as great as ever. You sound as great as ever. And questions. Who's got questions for anybody up here?
Yeah.
My dude.
This is for Mr. Lovano. How did you get to where you are now as probably the greatest touring saxophonist? How have you, gotten to where you are now, and what are some of the things you could tell us about how we can grow musically?
Thank you for that question. I would say living in the library of the sounds and spirits of the music, the masters, give you direction and a foundation that you build on throughout your lifetime as a musician, developing on your instrument and within all of the instruments. Because when I say live in the library, not just, for me, it wasn't just the saxophone players. It was all the drummers and bass players, piano players and singers, guitar players. So you start to learn how to listen and hear what you're listening to while you're playing. Now, of course, you do that listening to records. You're in the audience of everybody you listen to on recordings. And that just continues to grow, and you feel the inspiration from who you're listening to. They were inspired to play like that. The Dizzy Gillespie's and the Sonny Rollins and Wayne Shorter and Herbie Hancock and Chick Corea, Don Byas, and the more people you listen to and absorb and embrace in the world of music, the more you develop as a player. Not just in one style or another, just in the feeling of the world of music.
Thank you, Joe. Way back there.
Well, there's tempo in the second note you play, there's a feeling of time and momentum. And as an improviser, we each create momentum in our ideas and in the flow of the harmonic sequence. And if there is no harmonic sequence and you're just playing in a free-flowing manner, you're creating a harmonic sequence. And you're creating like the momentum of how you're feeling, you know? Everybody has a rhythm spirit in them that ties together with the melodic intention and execution of melody. So melody and rhythm are one. It's a oneness there. And if you follow the sound, it takes you places. To create a song from the first two notes, the first note. Everyone has that song in their heart. And to tap into that is something else. Thank you for that question.
You tied that into your first answer as well. That's so
Yeah.
beautiful.
Following the sound.
Yeah, yeah. Where's Dr. Smith? We got time for one or two? Two questions. We got time for, to my friend here.
Mr. Lovano, when you came into my small convo today, you talked to our group about, as musicians, feeding each other with ideas. As a horn player and as a band leader, what do you want to hear in a rhythm section to inspire you and feed your play?
Well, as you just heard us play, we were each feeding each other ideas and initiating, feeling the confidence to initiate ideas and to give the music some inside directions. Like the way this master drummers in the world of music initiates ideas and feeds you and plays off of what you do. For the three of us to play with Billy and Jabali here is a blessing. I played one of my first gigs in New York City. I was playing with Dr. Lonnie Smith, and he was living in Detroit. I was in Cleveland, and we were playing together, and we came to New York, played a gig, and Billy played drums with us. That was 1974. I was like, 20 years old or something. And man, it was a small club somewhere, man. I don't really remember. But we came to town and we did a recording session, Lonnie and I. Well, it was Lonnie's record.
Right.
It was my first time in the studio like that. And but we played, and Billy played with us. It was amazing to meet him, because I had heard him first time with Wandishi, Herbie Hancock, in Boston, maybe 1971, 2, with the band, Julian Priester, Benny Maupin, Eddie Henderson, Buster Williams. That was amazing. That was, So, when you're in the audience of the recordings you're studying and growing with, all of a sudden you find that some of the cats you were listening to are in your audience. That changes your life, man. It sends you to a woodshed. So, to play with Christian, who's not just playing a bass line, he's playing melodies and he's creating inside the bass line. So to have that inner dialogue with Christian, with bass players that play with that concept and approach, you end up playing less because you're listening and you're involved in the dialogue. And also the comp, the momentum from the piano or guitar, to feel the hookup between the drums and the piano and the bass. Being with the bass line keeps you all together. And there's room for all these shifting polyrhythmic ideas that happen. Like, where do you get your ideas? First, you get them from the piece you're playing. All the things that piece is giving you to feed off of. But then you deal with everybody's interpretation within that. And that creates new music all the time. On a tune you might have played forever. Becomes a new expressive vehicle with the combinations of people, you know. In this multicultural, multi-generational world that we live in, that's the real blessing. That embrace.
We got time for one more. I saw a hand over here. Let's do my man.
I have a question for have you had any big obstacles in your career so far, and if so, how did you overcome them?
I think every last one of us up here have had some sort of obstacle, whether it be real, self-inflicted. Yes, there's always some sort of something you'll have to overcome in your life. It might be a health issue. It could be a mental issue, anxiety, self-doubt, insecurity. A lot of us go through that, you know. But, you know, I was always kind of taught that you put your head down and you get through it. You know what I mean? Like, it's going to get better. Playing, particularly when I first moved to New York, you know, these were two of the kings, you know. So the fear of playing with them for the first time when I was still in my late teens, you know, it was just like, oh man, I sure hope I don't look like an idiot playing with Billy Hart. I hope after we play together, he'll approve. I hope that after I play with Lovano, I don't look or sound like an idiot. I hope he'll approve. And yeah, you want something real bad and you make a plan and you go for it and you just wonder if your plan's gonna work, but you just gotta, you know, be like, I got this. You know, that's what you have to tell yourself. You know, just do like Kobe Bryant, the Black Mamba. Just work hard. Don't let nothing stop you.
Class, but before we get to class, can we give one more standing ovation to the legendary Billy Hart, Lovano, Mathis, Piccard, and of course, Piccard. Keep it going, Lovano, Billy Hart, Mathis, Piccard, Chris McBride. All right. Everybody start making your way to class, please. Thank you for a great concert.